Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome back. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. Let's head over to the website, shall we? We're going to take a gander through what they have to offer. I'm looking at the hunting collection. By the time this episode comes out, I'm actually going to be on my first hunting trip of the year using a lot of this stuff. So you can go through the collection, check out what they have to offer there. Oh, and the hunt for premium spices. My God, people love pumpkin spice, to include my wife. Fall is her favorite season, and I have no explanation for why. Light roasts all the way to extra dark. Just go ahead and use this rotating banner here, or slide bar, I should say, to search whatever you want. And if you click on any of the bags of coffee, you're going to get a way more detailed view of what is in the bag. Then there's apparel, gear, coffee bundles, and coffee samplers. You can join their email. You can follow their social media. I'm going to scroll back up here to the apparel, gear, and coffee sampler and coffee bundles. Start thinking a little bit about holiday season. Coffee lovers love getting coffee stuff. The bundles and samplers, those are really cool gifts. I've given them to quite a few people, especially when you find someone who is a coffee nut, a coffee head, a coffee fan, and they have a way that they like to make coffee. It's pretty cool to provide them a full kit and system for that. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com and go to town. Support an amazing brand that supports amazing people and makes this podcast possible. My guest today is Bill Thompson. He is the founder of Spartan Forge, which he does a very good job of describing. It falls into the category of a hunting app. And that's a shit description because it does so much more than that. Imagine somebody who has 22 years of serving in the military from an intelligence capacity and perspective, very, very deep into the intelligence apparatus, and uses that knowledge and expertise and starts developing software to predict behavior of animals, to track movement of animals through open source networks, who develops layers of mapping using, in addition to things like satellite or UAV, but LiDAR. So you can see through the foliage and look at the type of terrain that you're going to be encountering. It's an amazing app. I downloaded it shortly after we sat down for the podcast, and I have been using it a lot, and I'm going to be using it for my upcoming hunting season. Bill's a fascinating person. He does a great job of explaining who he is, where he came from, and what he did in the military, so I won't even get into that. Let's just dive into episode number 353 with Bill Thompson. Enjoy.
Okay, I got the red smoke.
Gun run! North and south! West of the smoke! West of the smoke!
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Come on with it, baby. Give it to me. I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
You and I are probably both libertarians.
Yeah, I'm probably a The only thing about libertarian is that where I differ, and I could change on this because I'm changing all the time, is I do believe that we need a strong foreign presence. Not
Agreed.
strong, but I mean, there needs to be people around the world like yourself that can react at a moment's notice if something pops off somewhere, or act as a deterrent for people who will do that. So like the fact that
I think the modern libertarian definition fits that model.
Okay, well, then I'm probably a libertarian.
Yeah.
I mean, my thing, and when I talk about these things, and it usually falls on deaf ears or people don't like the conversation because maybe they think it's not as compelling, is my thing is I just don't want the president to have as much power as he does. Like,
fuck no.
I just want it, like, why does one guy make a decision for 300 million people? Like, let's push all of the power back down to local, the state, the school board.
Yeah.
Like, that is where all of the decisions should be being made because that's where we can actually exercise change.
Yeah.
You can't exercise change at the federal level in any meaningful way.
Well, especially not with the size of the current government.
Right, exactly. And the expenditures and the programming. So to me, it's like, let's push everything. I'm actually, when you watch like the Bill Clinton's State of the Union, his last time in office, have you watched that before?
God, it's been years.
So I would encourage you to watch it again. I'm voting for that guy. We're going to secure the book. If Bill Clinton, with his policies from 1996, was running for office today, right? Like, obviously there's a zeitgeist and things change. Now I would never vote for who he is now.
Yeah.
But what he talks about in that State of the Union, he focuses on raising wages through the free market, border security, and getting us out of debt. And he pledges to work with Newt Gingrich, which he did, and he left office with a surplus.
Yeah. I'm down for that.
So, like, give me that all day long. Like, I'll take that all day long. And look at what's happening in the last 24 hours with the Russian TV stuff.
Oh, fuck, dude.
Where these people are, like Lauren Chen, right, who used to say some stuff.
That entire, and again, I can see a world where they had no idea.
I can too.
Because they don't, I mean, I get advertising dollars for the podcast from Black Rifle, and I was having a conversation with somebody the other day. I am doing zero investigative reporting upstream of where that money hits the account.
Yeah, but you know Evan and you trust Evan.
I know Evan, but that like Mike is a domestic terrorist. You know what I mean? Maybe he's a Russian asset that has co-opted Evan. And for anybody who just happened to tune in, I'm fucking joking. My God, before they edit that into a 30-second clip.
This will be a reel.
Yeah, but I'm not doing any investigative work upstream. I can see a world where those people had absolutely no idea.
But I think you would, because again, all of this is changing in real time. The narrative could totally change by this afternoon. This is, the morning of what's the date today? My watch is not telling me.
The 6th?
The 6th.
Yeah.
The morning of the 6th. By the afternoon, the 7th, it could be a totally different story. But right now, if someone came to you and said, because what I'm being told is they're being offered money orders of magnitude above what is normal, something like $100,000 a week.
Which is a red flag in and of itself.
Right, which would make a curious person say, now I am going to, this isn't like sleepmattress.com, right? I'm going to now pull the string because there's an order of magnitude of money here that I normally command.
Yeah.
And they're asking me to talk about specific talking points.
That would raise curiosity.
That would make me pull the string.
Yeah.
Now, if it's just like, the water company or whatever, like, and they're right in line and I can see nothing nefarious, then let's go. And I like the product. But when they're starting to offer you that much money, I think it's incumbent on you, as you talked about before, as someone who's trying to be a truth teller and not foil your credibility that you've built over the years, to say, okay, this is weird. I'm getting $100,000 a week.
Yeah.
When I usually get that in a month or a quarter or a year for something. Like, what's going on here? So, something's foul in the state of Denmark.
I mean, you have two choices. You dig into it or you buy a Ferrari.
Yeah, well, never seen anyone frown in a Ferrari, so.
God, I'm trying to think if I have either.
Ferraris and jet skis. You have to smile when you're in those things.
You don't see people crying on jet skis.
No, you don't.
Do you?
No, you don't. And that's
you see ear-to-ear grins until they detonate and get ejected and go flying off the top, which is where it transfers to me having an ear-to-ear grin.
Yeah, and then a SEAL looks at it and says, how can I submerge that thing?
I mean, I look at it and I say, how could I never get on one of those things?
Yeah.
I'm completely exhausted from small watercraft of all kinds.
Yeah, I've actually never been. I don't know if I've ever. Oh no, I've been on a jet ski one time, but I mean, I love the image of 1996 dude on a jet ski with a girl in a neon green bikini listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival on the lake. Like, they're always smiling.
Yeah,
so
they are. And they are in Ferraris too.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, so that's fair.
I'm just trying to give the devil his due.
Yeah.
And be balanced.
Are you hopeful for the trajectory of our country?
I mean, I was until about 28 minutes ago. So, I mean, I would say that there's I'm sorry, my personality, I have no short answers. And so when you say that, I automatically go, I always try to think, and I'm not trying to quote Elon Musk here, but I really do try to think back to first principles when I get asked a question like that. Mm-hmm. And my hope is that people start understanding that power can't be centralized at that high of a level, and that it needs to be distributed down. And I think people are seeing with things like COVID and like the ivermectin stuff and the studies that are coming out about that, that people are starting to realize that none of the people at that level, for the most part, I would say 95% of them, don't truly have our interests at mind, and that most things are examined through a rubric of what's going to get me my votes for the next election. Mm-hmm. And that the greatest economic ladder in this country seems to be politics. They're
really good at stock picks.
Yeah, they're awesome at stock picks. You go into office, they're worth $300,000. They leave office, they're worth $15 million. They've had 2 book deals. They're at the dinner parties
on a salary that's what, a couple $100,000,
if that. Yeah. The president was like $400,000 until a few years ago. The chief CEO of the company, or the chief executive officer of the company, until a few years ago. So
let me ask you this though: do you think that it is politics that corrupts that individual, or corrupt individuals want to have jobs like that because at the end of the day they're about personal gain?
Again, to break it down, I think it's about a sleepy society that has not stood watch while power was centralized, and it's actually on individuals and the people to examine what's going on, because we allowed the government's complicit, because the government's going to always seek power. Power will always, it's a snowball that will always try to gain momentum. It's got to be on the people to say, actually, there's a Bill of Rights, and the 10th Amendment says anything not spelled out in this document explicitly should be left to the state. Mm-hmm. But now we have an EPA. You can't buy a light bulb or a flush toilet without approval of the federal government. That's not how things should work. The point and the founders organized that document so that there would be federalism. Well, if you read the Federalist Papers, Federal 51, John Jay, James Madison were brilliant in their architecture of the Federalist Papers and how they fed into the Constitution, and they were advocating for it. So you can read that and actually understand why they did everything they did. There was a thought that they weren't even going to enumerate the Bill of Rights because they didn't want to see it as a power that was bestowed by government. The function of the Constitution is to acknowledge natural rights. The Second Amendment is a natural right, your ability to protect yourself against, first, a tyrannical government, which is the form of it that it took on in that time and that they were dubious about. The Second Amendment was meant to be a check to government. It's not for hunting. It's not for any of that. It's for self-protection. And so the 10th Amendment said anything not spelled in this document goes to the state. And what we've allowed, the states have allowed, and it started in like the 1920s with the 17th Amendment, was the 17th Amendment changed the structure of the Senate so that in the Senate it became a popular vote. The Senate used to be elected by governors and state legislatures who would elect a senator. They would find a successful businessman and say, hey, you made it in Missouri because of our laws and how we do things here differently than Minnesota. So when you go to the federal government, you ought not allow any legislation that would hamper how you made it here, and we're going to hold you accountable. And they could pull him out at any time.
The old "don't forget where you came from"
Yeah,
motto.
Exactly. Yeah, but also protect our states' rights.
In better English than I just said it. There was probably some thous and doths and all sorts of stuff.
You have to, yes.
You musteth.
Yeah, musteth. And so, but what happened was they changed that, the 17th, I believe it was the 17th Amendment, changed it so it became a popular election. And what happened with the popular election was, and again, if you read things like Leviathan by Thomas Locke and other, the founders used books and treatises and writings by people to inform how they wrote the Bill of Rights. What they understood was mob democracy, especially as a result of the French Revolution, because the French Revolution was happening at the same time, where they realized if you had a true democracy, 51 could rule the 49. Mm-hmm. So 51% of people could rule the 49% of people. So that's why we have an electoral college, and that's why we had a Senate. The House was the only true democracy piece of the founders, the structure that the founders laid out, so that the House was meant to act like the petulant child of government. Like, we want this, we want this, we want this, we want this. And the Senate would be like, well, that's kind of a good idea, so we'll talk about that. These are all horrible, and it's going to make everything fall apart. But what happened was they changed the 17th Amendment and it became a popular vote. And what happened, the issue with that, and why it might sound innocuous, but why it's really not, it's actually quite it really hurts the integrity of our system, is because now a senator to get elected in Minnesota just has to stay in Minneapolis. And the values in Minneapolis are not the values for Minnesota writ large. So he or she only has to stump in Minneapolis. And cities, by their virtue, which the founders understand well, tend left because that's where your centers of academia are. That's where your people who have ideas that they don't have to suffer under are. That's where, but it's also where knowledge and beauty and museums and stuff come from too. Mm-hmm. But they were undergirded by the agricultural society, or the people who actually had to live by their own rules. And like, if you failed on that farm, you lost the farm. They were all propped up by those people. But what happened was, and this was the intent of the 17th Amendment, I think, even though it's never been explicitly said, was, well, if we can make it a popular vote now, you're going to tilt the Senate to the left, because now everyone just has to stump in big cities. And then if we do it writ large, our society, people are now complaining about the Electoral College, not having an understanding of why that was instantiated. you could technically get into the presidential office by just campaigning in New York and LA.
Yeah.
You could get all of the votes that you needed from 2 cities. How are those cities politically going to manifest themselves?
Left.
Yeah, and that's why, thank God for the Electoral College, because it's the only reason why Ohio and Pennsylvania and Georgia are still important at a federal level, because they have to go and convince those states that don't represent the zeitgeist of Silicon Valley or of New York City or of Wall Street. They have to go around the country. And that was the founders' intent. It's clear when you read the documents, the founding documents, that they wanted to make sure that new ideas could percolate through the House, the Senate could buttress them and make sure that the good stuff got through, and they could, the rising and falling times of the electorate would be represented through the House of Representatives, which is why it was 2 years. And then at the Senate level, it could go through to the president, and once that the Senate had made sure that states' rights weren't eroded. So this is a long answer to your question, but the point is the populace and the people who allowed the fundamental changing of our how we do elections, we fell asleep at the wheel.
When do you think we did?
Well, it started with the 17th Amendment.
Okay.
And then as power centralized and we started setting up organizations like, well, back in the day, it would have been like the Federal Housing Authority, where they got to decide where money went at the federal government, not a power outline in the Constitution, got to pick and choose where money went. And then that would be informed by the senators who were like, hey, I'll vote for this omnibus bill that's full of all of this pork and crap, as long as you make sure that the Federal Housing Authority puts a big tax grant to my district. So you had unnatural markets showing up and federal manipulation of the free market system, which eventually tilted the country to two things. More left than it actually is. Like when you poll most Americans are pretty conservative. But we do need liberals, because that's where the good ideas come from. And the government, the founders understood that. So it tilted us left, but it also centralized power, because states sacrificed all of their autonomy and all of their power and their capital to the federal government. And so now you have a federal government that has centralized all of the money, power, and authority, and then set up unelected systems of bureaucratic nature like the EPA and the Department of Education. A Department of Education shouldn't exist. I know that sounds crazy to people, but I encourage you to look it up and read about it. You don't want the federal authority determining what is education and what isn't, because they're going to favor education for whatever the zeitgeist is at the time. Yeah. The federal government wants X. They don't want people going back and looking at how we acted as a country or our true founding. So we get rid of civics. And we haven't had civics at the public education level, K through 12, in any meaningful way. I never took any civics classes. There might be an American history class that offers some civics, and they might only talk about the First Amendment, but they certainly don't talk about the importance of the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th Amendment. And how they impact society or why they were stood up. So now you have an uneducated, unelected class of people that have risen to the top, and their only rubric that they view the world through is, how do I get more votes? And so it's a long answer about how this happened, but to me that makes sense. And so now we're in a position where you and I should be much more focused on the school board. You and I should be much more focused on our local state representatives and our governor, because A, they should be impacting what's happening around us, but B, we can actually affect change. Like you can really affect change from your level, but it's all been centralized up there, and now they get to decide where the country goes. So it's the nature of government.
What do you think it would take to unwind it to a reasonable level? Do you think it's even possible to do so?
I think so, because the Constitution is still there. And the Electoral College is still there.
Did you see the article that Rogan posted maybe 2 days ago?
I saw that article the day it came out.
The Constitution is dangerous?
Yeah. Like that, right? Like that to me, and I'm not saying it does, but I had to think long and hard about how that does not border treasonous.
Yeah. For clarity, I didn't read the article. I saw Joe's post. So
yeah, no, I read the article. I actually put it on my social media that morning that I saw it come out, because I read the New York Times, I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the Washington Post, just because I'm trying to understand the thinking over there, or it indicates when you read those things, then you know what's coming in about 2 months or 3 months.
Yeah.
It's the lead time.
It's a good temperature check.
Yeah, and just what's going on at these places, these positions of power, and so I saw that article, and that is pure insanity to me. It blows my mind that we're talking about if the Constitution is a fundamental threat to our body politic and our political system, then what is our political system?
The Constitution is supposed to be a threat to our political system.
That's what it's there for.
I have conversations with people, and I'll ask them about, and don't get me wrong, I am not a constitutional scholar.
Neither am I.
By any stretch. But I realize that it's not the Constitution that provides me the rights that I have.
Right.
It's limiting government, not some bestowing document that before the Constitution, I didn't have the right to free speech or self-defense, or jury trial of or the Fourth or Fifth Amendment rights when it comes to self-incrimination. It limits government.
Yes.
So many people I encounter think that
it empowers the government.
Yeah, that they would have had none of those rights if it weren't for the Constitution. I'm like, you guys have this completely backwards.
Yes, 180 degrees out of phase.
If the Constitution is dangerous to our political system, I think that's a good thing, because that means our political system is bouncing up against the ideology of the fucking founders of this country.
Yes.
So again, it goes back to the question, though: how would you change it? What would you do?
Myself?
Yeah. Bill's in power. You have 24 hours. You're in power, but goddamn, the pen stroke you have is powerful. Go to town.
I would reinstitute the state legislature and the governors electing senators. That the Senate is there to. The word Senate is the state. It's there to preserve states' rights, and so all of that power would flow back down. I would enact every piece of legislation that I could in that 24-hour period to push power as close to the individual as possible. That's what I would do.
What would you do about the size of the government? How would you reduce that?
The first thing I would do is I would cut organizations like the FBI, the CIA, DHS. I would get rid of DHS. I would get rid of TSA.
How dare you? Who's going to check to make sure your water bottle's empty?
The airlines. And then they can price, and then they can build that price into my airline ticket, and they can be responsible for it. And if they're shitty at it, then they should go away. That airline, if if United...
TWA was once a thing.
We're
they displaying
failed,
our age.
Right. They failed, and now they're gone.
Yeah.
So if a airport, or if United runs their security, and it's not good, and they haven't instituted the right checks and policies, and there's something that happens, then that business fails, and a new one comes in, and they have now the left and right limits. Like, oh, we really need to nail down the security part. And then that might raise our price a little bit. But then people will be like, oh, you know what? New United really has their shit together. I'm going to fly with New United because Delta is still a little lax. Mm-hmm. That free market system allows the cream of the crop to rise up, which they have the most vested interest for people's safety because they're a business that wants to have. But with Homeland Security, they will always be funded, and they will always grow.
The argument you would get against that is, while these organizations are trying to figure out best practices, what's to stop another?
There would be suffering.
There would be suffering, and people will tell you the government's role is to stop that suffering.
Well, I would say that's the hangover period that we need to go through once we get off the sauce. Like, it has to happen. That's the only way that it happens, because...
Would you be willing to have your family directly involved in that suffering for that progress?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't fly during that point in time until these airlines start coming out and saying, here's what we've done. Here's how we're making it safe. We're adopting most of the policies from the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA. And we've there's no grand knowledge or sense of profundity that's bestowed on someone when they become a public bureaucrat. A private airline that has the bottom dollar and their investors to look in the eye when they're making business have every incentive to make sure that they hire the best security people and that they're encouraging and using the best practices. But again, people would say, well, big businesses become corrupt. Well, they only can become corrupt when all the power is centralized at the federal level, because instead of running a good business, they can just go use money to get politicians elected that will make sure that the barriers to entry for small businesses are too difficult. That's what Facebook does. That's what Meta does. That's what United's doing. Listen to Elon Musk talk about all of the bureaucratic red tape that he had to go through in order to get Tesla to become a car factory. Mm-hmm. And the only reason he could do that is because he made all of his money off of PayPal, mm-hmm. and then he got to use that to fund all of these other things that he was doing. But that is the progression. And when you look at that, Elon doesn't take the subsidies. He doesn't take the he said it on that interview where he's like, threaten me with advertising dollars, go fuck yourself. And that's the type of people that an informed politic would elect through the free market system. And you want the Elons running the airport. If Elon ran the airport, it'd be a much safer airport. I'm not saying it needs to be him. I'm saying someone like him.
In my head, as you're saying it, I'm thinking real time, like, what the fuck would an airport look like run by Elon Musk?
Like a Tesla.
Oh, God.
Yeah, like Tesla.
There'd be a robot serving you burgers.
It'd probably be pretty awesome. But
I'd be willing to let him test on one.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Elon, you get to have LAX. Mm-hmm. Let me see what you can do.
He'd make it a mecca of airports. And so, that is what I would do. Is people say we need to get money out of politics. You've again assessed the problem at the wrong level of analysis. We need to get the power out of politics, because there will be no incentive to pay politicians off if they don't have the power to affect change nationally. If the power goes down to the individual, and the federal bureaucracy can only leverage the Constitution to understand what their left and right limits are, then there would be no reason to buy someone off at a political level. If they don't have the power, there's no incentive. Yep. We create the incentive structures because it's good for government. It's good for the people who are being paid off at a high level to centralize as much power and authority as they can.
What, from a percentage-wise, 0 being the founders' framework and size of government, 100% being the size of government now, what would you trim it to?
I would trim it to I would start with what the founders had.
Well, when they were first sitting there writing stuff, they had 0, so it probably has to be a little bit more than that.
Yeah, 7. I mean, that's not something I've deeply thought through, and I'd say
at a minimum, we could probably reduce the size of government by 50%.
I would say 80. And the reason why I would say 80 is because I was through 3 government shutdowns where I worked in the Capital Beltway during them, and there was almost no mission loss, and effectiveness actually went up because the rungs to activate and get things done lessened, and the efficiency actually went up during some of those points because 80% of people were at home, and you didn't have people validating their existence or making sure that your TPS report had the right verbiage. You just wrote something, it went up, it got approved, and you're done. So I would reduce the scope and size of the federal government. There would still be, for certain purposes, there'd still be an FBI. For certain purposes, all of the functions of the CIA would go back to the DOD. The CIA would almost entirely cease to exist, because the CIA is a organization that was founded to support the DOD, and they've totally escaped that mandate. If you look at their founding charter, they were meant to support the DOD and the federal government through Title 50 collection overseas.
Let's be real honest, and people probably don't know this. They're a micro DOD in and of themselves right now.
Yes, exactly. And they've got so much money and so much authority, and they've, I believe at this point, certainly probably killed a president. Or Dulles probably had something to do with that.
JFK?
Yes.
I mean, the ballistics make a lot of sense there. You know what I mean? I've seen bullets do hard lefts and rights. I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah, a rib can really deflect some stuff. So, and then the other thing I'd do is I'd put those organizations, what's left of the FBI would be in Nebraska, in Omaha. What's left of, name your organization. I don't know what organizations would survive exactly, but wherever they are, they would be decentralized, and they'd be nowhere near Washington. And they wouldn't be allowed to have field offices in Washington. Washington would go back to what it was, the District of Columbia. It would not be a power center. I would kill that whole market there. It's disgusting. And all of those organizations would have to be put in disparate locations throughout the U.S., where it's not easy to go down to Capitol Hill and affect change or line your own pockets or do the things that are being done.
Would you have a joint command center with those, we'll call them alphabet soup organizations, somewhere outside of their HQs, just to make sure that the collaboration and communication is there?
No, because we flattened the world pretty well through technology.
Okay.
I would say you guys can do this through a Zoom call. And if you can't, that's probably a good thing. Of course, people can fly and meet and stuff like that. Like that would all happen. But when you're shrunk by 80% and you're put in these disparate locations and your left and right limits are clearly delineated, which they no longer are. Even as far back when I joined the military, 25 years ago, it was very evident to me, even as a junior enlisted, or a senior enlisted guy, even as an E5 or an E6, that we have Title 10 authority. We can do operational preparation of the environment to enable kinetic effects, and that is our role.
You should break down Title 10 and Title 50, the differences.
I'm sorry. I
understand
forgotten that we're in a podcast and I'm talking to you right now.
I get Title 10, Title 50, but most people probably wouldn't.
Yeah, so the Army has what's called Title 10 authority, and Title 10 authority gives us the right to kill and break things.
That's probably one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of it.
Yes, and the reason is because I did the ethical hacking stuff, which is a funny moniker. I did the SIGINT human. I was certified as a signals intelligence technician. I did the human intelligence technician, and then I did the cyber thing. That was the last part of it. My ability to collect information to prepare. We have a JPEL list, right? So we get into country. I don't know if you guys use that moniker.
We did, and essentially for the listeners, that's a targeting list.
Yeah, a joint prioritized effects list. Here are the people we're going to kill when we're in country.
Which is what they should call it, but they go JPEL instead.
Yes, yeah. Here's the list of. We're going to come up with some great new names. We can write all these down.
Yeah. This is the get fucked list.
Yes.
If we encounter you, you're getting bent over.
Yeah. You're two in the chest, one in the head, and I'm entitled under Title 10 to do collection, which is. During non-times of war, a Title 50 collection information, more strategic level collection information that informs the government's targeting process and their intelligence mechanisms generally is a Title 50 function unless you go to war. When you go to war, the people who need to break things and kill people need a collection ability, and then they get what's called operational preparation of the environment authority under Title 10, so that when I'm going to that country, now I can collect intelligence. And that intelligence is for me, as an intelligence technician, as a warrant officer, was to inform the commander on the ground. Here are the collection efforts that I've set up to meet your CCI or your information requirements. And now I'm collecting, and I get that title under my Title 10 authority to do intelligence collection.
Which normally, correct me if I'm wrong, in a non-time of war would go back to Title 50.
It would go back to Title 50.
And the government entities.
Yeah, and they pick it back up, and it's like a continuity of service.
Yep.
Because you don't want Title 10 guys everywhere collecting intel for 50 years, because then they become the dangerous. It was actually a good system, the way that it was set up. So, but what's supposed to happen is if there are Tier 1 human intelligence assets in that country who are generally being handled by the CIA is saying, yeah, we've got these 3 personas in this country. They've got great placement and access. They're giving us great intel. And if I get into that country as an Army guy, what's supposed to happen, it doesn't ever happen. And there will be some CIA people or whoever will comment, or some bots or someone who will make fun of me or do something. That's fine. I don't care. What's supposed to happen is that target is supposed to pass over. If that human intelligence resource is going to help that commander on the ground, he's supposed to have now the authority, the operational control over that asset. It's supposed to be passed from the CIA to the Title 10 organization in the country. Now, there's a side saddle, just like any RIP, TOA, where you go into country and you learn the job. They should be working together.
RIP is relieve in place. TOA is turnover authority.
I'm sorry.
That's right. We'll pick him up.
Again, I keep forgetting we're in a podcast. So when that exchange happens, then now that battlefield commander who's got to execute effects on behalf of the President of the United States needs those authorities and those accesses. What always happens is the CIA says, go fuck yourself. I'm not giving you any of this intel. I'm not telling you any of this stuff. You're not participating in any of this, except for in very certain circumstances where the CIA where they feel like they've become the cool guy. So if a developmental group says, hey, you guys are managing a source that we need access to and we need the intel from, the CIA will generally play. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to like the Green Battlefield Commander from like 1st Special Forces Group or the 1st Armored Division, they'll be like, fuck yourself. And
which is wild
for the most part. And I've seen this. Again, I should say I'm speaking from what I've seen. It could be that at some point, some chief of station handed over the keys or gave a bunch of intelligence to the 1st Armored Division Tactical Commander and helped him out. Not saying that hasn't happened. By and large, my observations and that of my peers in the intelligence community at a very high level have always gotten the brick wall when it comes to what strategic assets are being managed in this country that can inform our targeting cycle in order to leverage and execute tactical and kinetic effects on targets in country. They would be told to fuck off. So mostly they're out there either trying to build out their own source networks, starting from the ground, and recruiting a source is not easy. Like the time and country is required, the bona fides, the placement and access verification, the source selection cycle.
You're talking years.
Years, exactly. So you've got someone who's in there for a year at most. They might be a quarter of the way through vetting someone that could be providing intelligence now. So they start over, and then you have this disjointed thing. So what happens is the CIA, the NSA, for the most part, say to the DIA and the rest of the intelligence gathering mechanisms, 90% of the time, go fuck yourself when it comes to we need this intel or we need access to the source or this sensitive collection site or whatever. It's just like not happening. There are partnership programs with the NSA and the CIA where they partner with the DoD, but they still are giving them a very neutered, very distilled version of what's actually going on. And that lack of working together hurts our intelligence capabilities on the ground and our ability to prosecute effects, which will distend the war effort and neuter the tactical commanders on the ground who should have primacy.
The farther you view the situation that you're talking about from, the less it makes sense. Like,
yes.
Same team, same fight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're at the end of the day, I'm assuming that people at any alphabet soup organization, for the large part, like they're Team USA, right?
You would think so.
We want to have a victory, but yet are willing to withhold information from other people who are boots on the ground, who also want a Team USA victory.
Yeah.
I mean, even at a micro sense, like right up in front of that problem makes no sense. But the farther away you look at it, like, what the fuck is going on here? Why would anybody do that?
Yeah.
I could see maybe not giving direct access to a source.
I can see that.
But but there's got to be some way between Title 10 and Title 50. Like, we have some questions. Can you, in some way, shape, or form, get the answer to these questions? We need the information. Like, your source can be your source.
Yeah.
You know, but
answer these RFIs.
Totally.
Yeah.
Which is a request for information.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But it never happens. And then we shit the bed in some way because of that, or we knew that there was intel and it wasn't being exchanged. Meanwhile, they were on the same FOB, on the same forward operating base.
Yeah.
And so when you talked about, them being separate, it's like because of the flatness of the world, geographic disposition almost has zero effect on our ability to share and process information now because of how flat the world is through technology. But the Title 50, Title 10 thing, the CIA would be reduced by 80%, or I'm sorry, I would probably reduce it entirely. Those functions would go back to the DoD. The DoD would have a strategic office, an OSS.
Mm-hmm. Which, for people listening, was the predecessor to the CIA.
Yes, that would actually answer to battlefield commanders, the Army Chief of Staff, the Navy Chief of Staff, all of these people, and have their feet held to the fire when it comes to answering the intelligence requests of the people who are on the ground. Like, this is what we actually need to know to win this war. But they don't want to play. They're the cool guys. And I say this having, I won't go too deep down that rabbit hole. I have intimate knowledge of these organizations and how they work. I'll say that. Mm-hmm.
Are you a CIA plant?
I'm not a CIA plant. I'm advocating for their total decimation or their total
Which
destruction.
is what a plant would do, sir.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I would totally do away with that organization probably in its entirety. And there would be a relieving place. There'd be time. It wouldn't just be like, boom, you're done. Everyone go home.
You know what I think would be the biggest problem with that idea? Is that right now I think the line oftentimes at high levels between Title 10 and Title 50 is very fuzzy.
Yes, it is.
And the government will slide things back and forth depending on what end they want to achieve, and it allows them, and again, I won't go deeply into it as well, but at a command that I was at on the East Coast, we never ran out of money.
Yeah.
Because if we hit one barrier, I could justify it through a different line of funding.
Yep.
And maybe one of those lines was Title 10, maybe one of them was Title 50, and you could literally bounce around to achieve whatever end state you wanted to. So the answer was always yes.
Yeah.
In our foreign policy, I mean, I just don't think people understand from an agency perspective, they are a micro DoD. They had a full kinetic tactical arm.
Yeah.
And that was never their design or purpose. No. And so it allows our government to do shit that if you reduce these systems like you're talking about, they probably would still be able to do these things, but they'd have to be a lot more transparent about what they're doing and how.
Yeah.
And I don't think the government wants to do that.
Yeah, and so to buttress your point there, the CIA has no Title 10 authority. They do not have the ability, despite all the Jason Bourne movies you might ever watch, they do not have on paper an ability to kill or break.
But they have on paper the ability to hire contractors.
Yes, who kill and break. And that is wrong. They're a collection organization. You don't want civilians out there killing and breaking. That's not how the system's designed. And there's very good reasons for that, going back to our founding, where it needed to flow through the Department of Defense or the Secretary of War at that time, or earlier when we started doing these types of things. And so what happens is, when the NSA or the CIA does want to break things, then they'll be like, oh, hey, Army or Navy, we have this cool program where we're going to give your people target knowledge, okay? And you're going to come sit.
Is that the key word?
Yeah, target knowledge. And, well, they call them TOPIes, target officers of primary interest. We're going to let your Army guys sit in this TOPI. And, by the way, we might ask them to break shit every once in a while. So they're going to take that Title 50 hat and take it off. And when it comes time to push the key to break something, they're going to put this Title 10 hat on, and we're going to be the ones that tell them when to do that, not you. So then you've got a commander who's supposed to be the one who's executing effects. He's given his force to a national agency that's now saying, we want you to go break this thing. And then the soldier's doing it and I've done that on behalf of, now I was 23 at the time. I had no clue that there, I think legally this period will be looked at and said, how did we get here?
One fucked up step at a time.
Yes, exactly. One fucked up step at a time. So, and that is the centralization and the growing and the power of government. And to me, I've become, especially in the past 10 years or so, 15 years, I've seen and been privy to information and seeing things coming out of the dark shadow rooms where I first heard it and I was like, that didn't happen. Like, there's no freaking way that this, for instance, there's no way that the CIA would kill a sitting president. And then you spend some time in these places and these organizations and you look at it and you're like, these motherfuckers could have killed the president. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, I would have been making fun of myself. 25-year-old Bill Thompson would be like, what a crackpot you've become at 40. Because now, everything that I do, now that I run Spartan Forge, my hunting company, I have to put myself out there on podcasts and stuff like this. I didn't have social media until I started running this company. I, until 3 years ago, rooted every technical device that I had on my phone. I'm a trained media forensics analyst. So I can look at computers and phones and tell you things about yourself you probably don't know. I can do pattern of life analysis on someone's phone and say, hey, did you realize when it's below 48 degrees, you're always in the gym? And they'll be like, no, I didn't think about that. It's like, yeah, if you step outside and it's below 48, you go to the gym. If it's above 48.
Probably via this route.
You're running up that. Yeah, right. And here's the SDR that I would build.
Totally.
Yeah.
Surveillance detection route.
Yeah. So I did all of that. And then I watched these organizations leverage people like me to feed their machine. And then I rehear these stories and I start looking at these things through this new optic. And I'm like, yeah, it probably happened that way. That's probably what happened.
What do you think the likelihood is that these same organizations that we are talking about, who by charter should be facing external, have started looking internal at their own citizens?
I'm sorry, rephrase that one more time.
Do you think that these agencies are now targeting American citizens?
So targeting, no. Taking advantage of inadvertently collected information.
How inadvertent are we talking about, sir?
So a lot of our internet framework passes overseas, even if you're sending a message.
Yeah.
Say you're sending a message to Canada, that might traverse through Sweden.
Yeah.
And we might have a site that's doing collection from space or from ground that is picking up that stuff. And now what we have and what we started, and it came out of these things called the Church and Pike committees. I'm sure you've done all of your, I don't know if you guys had to do it, but we always had to do these like minimization training that flowed out of the Pike and Church committee hearings where they saw what was going on and they basically said, if you collect on an American citizen, here's the process that you have to go through. Inadvertently collect on an American citizen, there's a process for that.
I never did any collection, so I don't think we were
I shouldn't say that, but I'm saying like the OPSEC training and all of that stuff.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But anyway, at a deeper level, there was training where if these things inadvertently happen, But if you see something that could lead to life, limb, or eyesight, that needs to be cataloged and then highlighted and looked at later. Well, that's a repository of a bunch of collected U.S. information where people had a right to privacy, and it doesn't matter what they were doing. The government never went to a judge and got a warrant. There's no Title 32 collection authority that was engaged on behalf of a local federal or state law enforcement entity, but that information is still being stored, and we can go back to it later out of stuff that flowed out of the Patriot Act. Mm-hmm. So now you have inadvertent collection on U.S. persons that gets stored and is kept later. So if
do you think it's inadvertent?
I think.
Do you think that those agencies are intentionally collecting on Americans?
I think. Okay, so without having tacit knowledge, I would say the vacuum cleaner is a lot bigger than they need it to be, mm-hmm. and they know that it becomes a valuable resource, what's being collected, and they have no incentive to shrink the Hoover.
Yep.
I will say that.
And that's my concern, or one of my many concerns about those entities that have these fucking surgical scalpel tools that can, like you said, just dissect an individual just through their electronic footprint. What's to stop the wrong person from getting into a position of power and just turning that shit internal?
Yes. And coming up with, another September 11th happens, and now there's a Patriot Act 2.0 that's called something else innocuous.
Patriot Act could be the least patriotic act ever written.
Ever written. And I encourage
the loss of privacy and security involved in that is unbelievable.
Yeah, and there was really a spirit of war of the time that took over our country where everybody got behind it, including myself.
I didn't understand what it was at the time.
I didn't either, but I'm just saying, what I was hearing, I was like, we don't need planes being crashed into buildings anymore. Again. That can't happen again. Yeah. And it was Franklin who said, if you'll sacrifice security for, what was it?
Sorry. I was just thinking the same thing.
If you'll sacrifice
liberty for security,
you deserve neither.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that is the hangover of a free society. You asked before, there will be this point where planes won't be safe. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, we've been juicing ourselves and drunk for 30 years. And no matter how much you don't want it to happen, there needs to be a hangover when you've decided to stop drinking and there's a correction. And unfortunately, because we've allowed this to happen, there will be a hangover where there will be statistical outliers of people who will suffer as a result of the system correcting itself. But the only other option is to keep getting drunk.
I was going to say, your metaphor plays out well, because if you don't stop drinking and you continue down that path, you have a protracted and very painful death.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so that is an unfortunate. That is the essence of freedom. You need to be free to fail, because that's the only way that you can learn. When you incentivize people and say, look, we're going to make sure that you get $2,000 a month no matter what, through things like universal basic income or something. You are robbing people of the ability to learn from their lessons when they should fail and learn and take account for themselves and say, how have I created a situation where I'm a fantastic failure despite my best efforts? You're robbing them of the ability to learn from those failures, and you're neutering them in it's a very cogent neutering of the U.S. persona that has turned us into a culture of TikTok and abstracted pleasure through taking advantage of our evolutionary wiring. The blue of Facebook or the response of a thumbs up is what we seek now, and it's abstracted reality that is keeping us distracted from power grabs. And I know I sound like a kook right now. I'm sure I do, because my wife, who I love to death, will listen to this and roll her eyes for sure.
Probably only because she's heard you say it before.
1 billion times and in my sleep. But I know how I sound, but I think if you write down what I just said and look at it dispassionately, and then you look at the course of our country over the past 100 years, you would have a very hard time presenting an alternate path of analysis on what I've just said.
What got you interested in joining the military in the first place?
Getting out of North Dakota.
It was legitimate.
I need to get out of here. Yeah. Okay. I mean, my father died when I was very young. We talked this morning. Uh-huh. My mother, there were 5 of us. Our farm went under. The farm was sold. I still have the auction sale sign from the farm sale.
What were you guys farming?
Cattle. My father did railroad tie harvesting, which is pretty cool.
Is that legitimately what it sounds like?
Mechanical engineer. Yeah. He built a cherry picker that went on the back of a 1932 Kenworth. And when a railroad bought another railroad, they would call my dad and say, "We don't need these tracks anymore. You can keep the timber as long as you give us the iron."
No shit.
And my dad would go out and collect the timber.
Okay.
And then
what would he do with the timber?
Store it on the farm and sell it.
Okay.
Because it's all creosote wood.
Yeah.
That doesn't ever age. Like the fences that he put up for behind our Quonset to store our goats are still there today, and they look great because they don't ever age.
Yeah.
But the fences around the property, and then he would sell them to other people to do the same thing. And then he did farming cattle and grew up on a wheat and corn farm. So he died. My mom had no education. Went to work as a waitress. Made $15,000 a year, and I've got 2 siblings that have died from drugs, one from suicide, a younger brother that is fighting addiction right now, and one older brother who's gotten out of it.
Are they still in North Dakota?
All of them are still in the North Dakota area. I have an older sister who's sober now, or has always been sober. My oldest sister, who I love to death, and I had no. When I meet the Lord, it'll be the first thing I'll ask him is, I had a real sense of shame. I remember very young, my brother getting arrested, my brother and older sister getting arrested for breaking into a fire hall and stealing beer. And I remember going to school and being ashamed the whole time I was there. And my younger brother, who's got a huge heart and, like I said, deals with his own problems, defended them to the death and would still do it to this day. And there's goodness there. Like he was obviously like the faithful, stuck by his family and said, "No, fuck you." And I remember getting in fights and get beat up, made fun of because he was standing up for the rest of the family. Whereas I felt a profound sense of shame. And I was like, and it was never really conscious, but I remember being like, I just don't want to do all that. I don't want to get arrested. I don't want to see my mom cry. I don't want to do any of this stuff. So as I grew up in North Dakota, we were in a small trailer. When I left for high school, when I left for the Army, it was just my mother and I in the trailer. My younger brother was in jail or in rehab. My older brother was also in rehab. And I just said, I need to get out of here. Like in North Dakota, where I'm from, I love it. I love the people there. But if you're not in a service industry supporting farmers, or you're not a farmer or a banker that works for farmers, there's nothing for you to do there. And I, having not been born with my father, didn't get the family farm, I wasn't going to be a farmhand. And I just knew I needed to get out of North Dakota. And so as luck would have it, and the Lord saw fit, a recruiter showed up to my school. I took note immediately of how all the girls talked about him in his uniform and said, that is my way out. That's how I can get the fuck out of here.
That might be a better military pitch than talking about the things that the military offers.
Yeah.
For people at the age of 18, young men, they're like, hold on a sec. Mm-hmm. So you're saying these uniforms are panty droppers?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't really care what the job is. Where do I get one of those?
I remember the girls. One of them was my ex-wife, and a couple of other girls. I remember their names. I remember they're talking about him and hearing that and being like, that guy's nothing special, but he's like, peel the uniform off and have him at Kinko's, and none of them's going to give him a second look.
Totally.
But he's now God for all intents and purposes.
Like I said, if you're listening to this,
yeah,
potentially change your recruiting slogan.
Right, exactly. Drop the panties and the parachutes.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah.
We could ideate on that for a bit.
We can. That was a first blush.
Yeah.
But so I saw that and I thought this is, and then there's a second aspect to it was they were promising me $300 every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which for a 17-year-old sounded like a ton of money.
What year did you join?
2000.
Okay. So I joined in 96. In 2000, I mean, because you obviously went down the intelligence pipeline. Did you know you were going to do that, or you found that when you were in?
Man, you're going to laugh. Are you ready to laugh?
Of course.
Okay. I mean, I think you're going to laugh. I think it's funny. I initially was going to be an MP, military policeman. And I thought it was cool to get a badge and a gun. And
it is cool.
Be able to pull over colonels. Right?
That would be super cool.
Yeah, especially as like a true blue private. It's like, sir, you're doing 27 and 25. You're endangering the troops here.
Just an E3, going up one side and down the other for colonel.
Yeah. Or letting them off and being like, I've got one now, right? I know who my promotion packet's going in front of. So I wanted to be an MP and being a dumb 17-year-old and truly I'm still dumb, but I'm dumb in a different way now. I was extremely dumb in all aspects then. I just didn't bring my driver's license when I went to the MEP station to in process. So the MEP station was either in Fargo or Minneapolis. I think it was in Minneapolis. It was like a 6-hour drive. And so I got there and they said, okay, we finished up your packet. I had my birth certificate and I had my passport maybe. No, I didn't have a passport at the time, just a birth certificate. And they said, we just need to make a copy of your driver's license to send off for the A school, for the AIT.
Yep.
Because they need to know everyone who's coming to MP school has driver's license. And I was like, mine's at home.
That's my bad.
Yeah, like, what are we going to do? And they're like, well, you got to come back next month. Because they only ran like a monthly bus or something like that. They're
and
like,
see, this is where cell phones in the modern era are a great thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like text some, hey, can you go snap a picture of my driver's license?
Right, and send it. Yeah. And, mom probably wasn't at home. She was probably working.
Yeah.
I probably didn't know where my driver's license was. And so it was an impossibility for me at that time. So I remember the recruiter saying, it's no problem, dude. Like, you've already enlisted. We'll come back next month. You can go then. And I said, no, there's no way. I had broken up with my girlfriend at the time. I had said bye to everyone.
Burned the boats.
I puffed my chest and left town. I knocked the sand off my shoulder and said, I'm done with this place. And I said, there's no option. Like, I don't fucking care what job you have to give me a job. And the recruiter was like, well, we can look at some other jobs and you can pick another one, then you can leave. And I was like, yes, good. I'm in. Let's do it. So they brought up, the recruiter brought up, like, there's this Intel job. There's only one E7 here that can start in first class who can brief you on it, and he'll brief you in a SCIF, in a information facility about it. You scored pretty well on like your ASVAB, and like maybe I took a D-Lab at that time. I think I did.
Is that the language one?
Yeah, the language battery.
Yeah.
I took it later for sure. They're like, you scored really high on these things, so actually you qualify for some jobs that are cool. So I went into the SCIF and I was like, what is going on here? Like, what is this? Like. Yeah. And I started hearing James Bond music, and he told me about electronic intelligence collection. And I was like, that sounds fucking cool. Let's do it. So I'm sitting here today across from you because I forgot my driver's license.
Well, you're sitting here today with the occupation that you have.
Yeah, I'm just
the
saying,
experience
like,
that you have.
I can tie a string from here to there because I went into intelligence.
Yeah.
I did the cyber thing. I learned computers. I learned human intelligence. I thought up Spartan Forge while I was in. All of the skills I needed to start Spartan Forge, my hunting application company, flowed directly from my military experience. And then starting Spartan Forge and being here, like, there's a string that I can tie from there to here. So the absurdity of life, it seems, can't be underestimated.
What do you think your trajectory potentially could have looked like had you not forgotten your driver's license? Do you think you would have enjoyed
been an
being
MP? I would have been in the 1st Armored Division, which was a fine unit. I would have been doing infantry operations, probably doing something as an infantry guy, because a lot of MPs were getting put into those infantry roles. I would have hated life because it wouldn't have been what I signed up for, and I would have been upset. Or I wouldn't have... There were people in the intelligence... There's goodness to the intelligence community, don't get me wrong, especially in the Army. The programs that I got recruited into and the... my trajectory to the special operations community was made possible by people who recognized something in me that I didn't even see in myself. And that wouldn't have been an opportunity as an MP, or it would have been a very low probability that would have been an opportunity. I have extreme ADHD. I have an extreme amount of energy. I don't sleep much. I'm always going. And it was a problem for me through high school. I was always getting in trouble, getting into fights, getting thrown out of class for talking on a turn. I was a horrible student, an abhorrent student. My father was a great student, and this girl that he was friends with growing up was my English teacher. And I remember her to this day, and I just ran into her a few weeks ago, pulling me aside and saying, look, when you apply yourself, you do awesome. Like, every time, like, you've written some papers about stuff that you were obviously interested in. And they were great. But, like, you need to apply yourself writ large, and then you can do better for yourself. And I remember her saying something along the lines of me to, like, you're literally a waste of flesh right now. Like, you have so much ability.
Strong.
And you have so much, like there's a lot of horsepower apparently, which I still think she's wrong about, but there's a lot of horsepower up there above your shoulders. And if you just put it to work, you could do well for yourself. Had I not joined the military, I probably would have been working on a farm, probably would have become like an alcoholic or something like that. I do enjoy a drink. But joining the military, being an MP, it wouldn't have invigorated the parts of me that truly are motivated to do things. It was when I was a kid, I got from like the back. Do you remember? Now we're really aging ourselves. Do you remember those papers the teacher would hand out? It would be like two pieces of paper, and there'd be like scholastic books.
Oh yeah,
and you could like circle books that you wanted. And in our school, it was awesome. If you read so many books, which I did read a lot of books, you would get so many books free. And we'd do this like drive. Mm-hmm. Shelley Schuster was her name. She was my teacher. But if I read so many books, then I got a certain amount of free books. And that really motivated me. But then what I really got motivated by was there was an old, like, not a ham radio, but like a crystal controlled coil radio where you could hear, you could pick up radio signals and listen to people talk and stuff like that. Without a battery or anything. You just tune this coil radio and there's a little earpiece and you put it in your ear. That fascinated me. Like signals are being propagated through the air right now, carrying information from Cambodia. How is this? What is this magic?
Yeah.
And I remember being extremely interested in that. No one ever sat me down and said, hey, if you can understand algebra or an RF link budget or calculus, you can actually build these things yourself and figure this stuff out. No one ever sat me down and said that to me. So I never paid attention to math or school or anything. But once I was in the military as an intel guy and someone said, you can kill more bad guys, you can be a gooder killer of bad guys if you understand an RF link budget, and we'll put you in an airplane. You can go locate bad guys and you can send guys like Andy to go kill them. I couldn't be satiated with the amount of information that I started ingesting and learning on my own time. I'd go home and study, especially when I was single. We were deploying for Afghanistan, and all of my off time was spent learning more and more about computer systems. I also built computers as a kid. Like I'd go to there would be a garage sale and someone would be selling an old 286 IBM, and I'd buy it just to run like Oregon Trail or something and play with it.
Hopefully the dysentery didn't get you.
Never the dysentery. I always overstock on meat and get stuck in the river.
Yeah, you got to ford the river.
Yeah. And
4 oxen were killed.
Yeah, every time. I never
Absolutely
learned.
Nobody has any idea what we're talking about.
I know. We're aging ourselves so badly right now. So, but anyway, I could not stop studying and understanding things and getting into ethical hacking on my own, or hacking at that time, or getting into RF signal theory and learning how cell phones work. And then the military, just by virtue of the war, needed more communication intelligence guys and less radar intelligence guys. I was a radar I did a radar analysis at the time. So I'd spent like 6 years learning the ins and outs of radars, learning how they work, building them, doing all of that stuff. But then because of the war, we needed more communication intelligence guys. Yep. So I got to cross-train and learn how a GSM phone works, or how a computer stores information, how hard drives work, how to take them apart, how to put them together, how to do forensics exploitation. During like 2004 to 2006, I was working with some of the first like media ingestion cells, where guys like you would assault an objective. There'd be stuff left over. At first, we didn't utilize that information like we should have. Mm-hmm. So the Iraqi survey group, ISG at the time, came up with this thing where we would have these cells where this information could be dropped off, and we would harvest it, and it would hopefully enable more kinetic, attacks, operations. So I started learning all of that stuff, and my off time was spent learning it. Anytime I could pick up something or do something or take a class or anything that did it, I was doing it. And then just through luck, I was at a presentation by someone who I didn't even know was in the military. And she was talking about cool and unique jobs working with the NSA as a military guy. And she was saying some stuff that wasn't correct about signal theory. So I corrected her. And I remember my commander at the time, he's a guy from, he was a first group and a 10th group guy named Terry Fry. He was like, Bill, sit down and shut up. Like, you need to shut your damn mouth right now. And I was like, well, she's saying shit that's not correct, and there's fucking general officers in here listening to her, And so
that's how bad policy gets built.
Yeah, exactly. And so afterwards, and but also I lacked tact. I really did. Like as a young soldier, like if your uniform was fucked up, I'd be the first guy to correct you. If you were a shitbag and fat at PT, I would be singing fat boy, why you so fat when we're running in cadence.
I can appreciate
I was a total asshole though. Like no tact. And anybody who served with me will probably comment and say like, yeah, I remember serving with Bill. He should have shut his mouth more. He might have been right, but he was not doing it the correct way.
The delivery was rough.
Yeah. And I hurt myself as a young soldier, like E1 to E4. I hurt myself as a young soldier by not understanding that. Because I just thought I have a rubric and I'm right. Like they've told me what I need to do. My boots need to be shiny no matter what the fuck I'm doing today. My uniform needs to be pressed. I need to have this haircut. I need to score this on the PT test. Life is easy. Mm-hmm. So when people weren't doing that, I was like, you're a drain on the taxpayer. I don't care about your fucking lupus. Go home. Like instead of being like, hey, let's go work out together. Let's do this. Let's do that.
Michael, what are you doing with the TV?
CSI?
I don't know why that happened.
Most of the time, he's over here watching fucking YouTube videos, which I feel like you just hit on the wrong window.
I would be
I'm
if
not
I were
watching
listening
YouTube.
to B2.
Where'd you make the jump to warrant? And why? Was it intentional or just part of your career?
Very
field?
intentional.
Okay.
I was working at another NSA facility, and there was a warrant officer down there. Her name was Karen Arbaugh. And she just took note of my, I sucked at being an NCO. Mm-hmm. I was a platoon sergeant at the time. I had soldiers, but I was just very young. I made E6 by the time I was 25. Once again, because I took advantage of the structure of the Army, and that if I had the right information, I could go to a board and present well and score well on my PT test, I'd get promoted.
The shit's not that hard.
It was not really difficult.
The military lays out for you a framework for success.
Yeah, and they'll tell you what to do for the first 7 years of your life.
And none of the things that they're asking, let's be honest, are that hard.
No, not at all. So but she took note that I was doing this, my own technical observations and making myself a better intelligence operator, and said, like, have you ever thought about warrant officer? And I really knew only of warrant officers as kind of like these one-offs that would sometimes show up to a formation. They always got to tell everyone to fuck off.
Or they were flying helicopters.
Or they're flying helicopters in the 160th. And so I said, yeah, I'd love to look into it. And I got what I thought we always needed to re-implement in the Army, which we've never done, and I think still we would, and maybe that'd be another thing President for 24 hours would change, is during like the Vietnam era, we had like a Spec 5 and a Spec 6 program where a specialist in the Army was, you're not an NCO, but you've been in for a while and you know your shit, so now you're a specialist. It's rank of E4. Mm-hmm. What the Army I don't remember exactly when, but they instituted a Spec 5, Spec 6 program, which is you've been in for 7 years, you're a great technical guy, you know how to run an operator, you can get us up on SATCOM quick, but you're not a leader of men. Like you're not inspiring anybody, buddy.
Mm-hmm. But damn good at your job.
And we do want to pay you more. So we're going to make you a Spec 5. You're going to be paid as an E5. You're not a sergeant. You don't have authority. You're not a non-commissioned officer. But we do recognize that we need you. And we lost a lot of soldiers who were not leaders, but they were great technicians. There wasn't a way for them to become warrant officers, but we would lose them. They'd have
an interesting
language.
bifurcation inside of that pay grade.
Yeah, it is. And I think it was a disservice that we got rid of that program. But the warrant officer program for me is an E6. And that was the thing, is you needed to be an E6 to go warrant. You could have been a Spec 6, and that would have been a better pipeline for a warrant officer, because the warrant officer is just like your technical expert in the unit.
It's the same way it's described in the Navy as well.
Yeah.
Because there's a warrant program. My commissioning source was actually through the same program. You get to pick LDO or warrant.
Yeah.
Actually, I take that back.
Officer.
Yeah. You didn't get to pick. It was the same interview, same paperwork. You declared which direction you wanted to go.
Yeah. So she turned me on to that, and I thought she showed me what her workday was like, which was the commander's got these things he wants to get done. He needs to know what kit the troops need. Is it good kit? Evaluate it. Train us up. Inform some DA PAM like information to make sure people are trained correctly. Get the NCOs good enough to train their soldiers, and that's your day. And so, or be a technical operator where you're doing really high level technical stuff. And I thought that sounds fucking amazing. Like, yes, please sign me up. So I became a warrant officer, and we go to Fort Rucker, Alabama. You basically do your basic training over again. It's really bad because the first time you go through basic training, and the drill sergeant tells you to go march in a field for 2 hours like a bunch of assholes, you're thinking there's some Mr. Miyagi shit here going on. Like we're learning something about ourselves.
We're being forged.
Right. We're being forged.
The crucible of the field that we're marching
Meanwhile,
through.
he just didn't have something on the training calendar. And he needed...
And he was hungover and taking
and
a
he was
nap in his
hungover,
office.
and his wife's leaving him.
Yeah.
Because he's been on drill sergeant duty for his third year. And but when you go through warrant officer school, they will tell you to go march in that field, and you know full well it's because someone didn't have the training calendar briefed, and the commander didn't brief something. So now you're just in that field.
That's a tougher pill to swallow.
It is way tougher to swallow, and you're being treated like a private. You're being treated like an E1 the entire time.
That is so nonsensical. So in the Navy, they sent me to Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And I'm not going to call it a knife and fork school, but I'm not going to say it wasn't a knife and fork school
Right.
at the same time. It was a gentleman's course more on, hey, here's your uniform and how you wear the thing.
Yeah.
Which, at somebody who had been in the military for 12 years already, much easier to tolerate.
Yeah.
Like our uniform inspection was on the hanger.
Yeah.
Hey, just make sure. And so, because it was, we need to make sure you have this. You've been in the fucking military for 12 years. We know you know how to put on a uniform. We're going to inspect your uniform to make sure that you have all the appropriate things on it. Done.
Yeah.
That's easier to tolerate than standing out in a hallway at attention.
Yeah, and having your shit tossed. You would get your shit tossed.
I don't know if I could have tolerated that.
It was
12
tough.
years in.
But there's wisdom in it, because looking back on it and talking to guys later and evaluating the program, a lot of people just wanted to become a warrant because there was more pay.
Especially from retirement as well.
And that you had less responsibility.
Okay.
So if you knew a warrant that you could convince to submit a packet, there was nothing. But what you had to do is go back to basic training for 8 weeks and say, actually, no, I want to be here.
Yeah.
Like the other side of this is going to be so good, and I'm so motivated and qualified to do this that I will put up with this for 8 weeks. And so
it's a good filter.
I think it was a good filter.
Yeah.
So that was the course I went, and I became an Army warrant officer at like my really young, again, very young, overly young, probably too young. I think I had been in for 7 years or 8 years.
What do they warrants? Do they start at 1 and go
Yeah,
up?
wobbly
Okay.
1.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does it go all the way up to 5? Like
5.
Okay.
Yeah, and I retired as a 4.
Okay.
So it was.
How'd you know it was time to get out?
It's a great question. I had transitioned out of supporting JSOC, and I supported in this like SIGINT human role, where I was not a JSOC guy. I was not. To be clear, I always say this on podcasts, and your audience probably knows better than others. I was not a long tabber. I was not a fucking ranger. I was the nerd with literal. I have pictures of myself with literal tape around my glasses, like athletic tape around my glasses, and my job was to answer the questions of the commander. Yeah. And hey, Chief, build the intelligence out here.
Here's what's lost in that, though. The people that everybody wants to focus on with the books and the TV shows and the movies on the super sharp front end of the spear can't do any of the shit that they do without people like you.
Thank you. That's nice to hear, because a lot of times dealing with team guys, especially, they'd be like, "Go fuck yourself." I'd be like, "I want to be." Well, not all team guys. I won't say that. It got
by team
JSOC,
guys, you mean SEALs, because that's how we call it.
No, I'm sorry. I meant ODA guys. Like
I was just about to talk shit on SEALs. It's fine.
No, I mean, no,
it's forgotten. It's so easy to get into that world, especially in the JSOC world, where it feels like it feels like the sun is orbiting around you.
Yeah, it does.
Because you got a 12-to-1, 15-to-1 support ratio.
Yeah.
What do I need to know about guns? I take it to the armor and I go, make shoot better.
Yeah. SOP Mod 2, go.
Totally. Make this the best ever. And also get me some civilian parts that nobody else is able to use. You forget, and then all day in the kill house or riding around on helicopters. Like, everything you're doing is fucking awesome. It's
everything you dreamed of as a child.
Yeah. And then you get overseas, and the JPEL list is like a receipt that doesn't end.
Yeah, right.
And it's like off the ceiling, down to the floor, and out the door. You're like fucking giddy up. Yeah. And you forget, though, what goes into creating that list and all the things that you used to do. If you were to take a JSOC element from, I don't care, green or blue, and put them overseas with none of that support, they would fucking kick rocks. Yeah. Right. I mean, they'd figure it out.
Somewhat, but not at the level that we had it figured out. Like,
that's what I'm saying. It would grind operational tempo to an almost halt.
Yeah, I mean, TFO at that, like back in the day, was at such a high, and we had such autonomy, or they had such autonomy. I was an embed through another program through the Army. Okay. We had our own selection, our own Q school. Yep. You would go through like the high risk offers course. You'd go through a lot of technical courses. You had to speak a language, preferably 2 languages. You would go through.
Did English count as one?
One for me. So you had to cross train on a language. You had to go do immersion in the language. You had to go to high risk meeting course. You had to go through all of the tech courses for whatever your specific program that you're being put into. For me, mine started in cyber and then transitioned to SIGINT and HUMINT again. So I was doing all three.
Yeah.
You went through all the pipeline could be between 2 and 5 years.
Yeah, and what you're already describing, I mean, you're read into multiple special access programs.
Tons, and you're doing all kinds of. But the awesome part about it at that time when I entered, and I will say this, like I've talked a lot of poop on the military, not the military, but more the 3 letter agencies. At the height of the war, I had such autonomy. Like, a team guy would be like, "Hey, I need this. Like, I've got a source. He's going here. I need you to build me X, Y, or Z." Like, I was doing shit that probably won't be done again for 30 years, where I was ordering shit online. Like, I go to Adafruit and get myself like a Zigbee or an Arduino. And
For clarity, I don't have a fucking clue of anything you just said.
Ordering microchips that would give collection capacity at a tactical level where it hadn't been built. So
you could have just told me that you're ordering like pineapples and broccoli. I would have not have known the difference.
So they'd be like, "Hey, we've got a guy who's traveling through these checkpoints where he's going to be searched, and we need to get this thing in, and it needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z while it's in there."
And you're building that shit.
And here's the size, weight, and power. I'd be sitting in my own room off the talk with an impact card with like a $30,000 limit and going online and ordering shit. And myself, another buddy of mine who I still communicate with to this day, and a couple of other NSA dudes who are embeds in the organization would be sitting there soldering shit and putting it together and then testing it for 2 weeks and being like, it's good to go. And we'd give it to a SEAL or who we were supporting at the time. One of my deployments was directly supporting SEALs. They didn't even know I was a military guy at the time. I just showed up and said, "I'm your nerd." And built this shit, and they'd go out and we would watch the IR, and bad guys died. And it was fucking awesome. Like, so often in the military, in the corporate world, or in everyday life, you have to abstract the victory. Like, you have to say, like, I'm filling out this report.
Not when it's on Reaper.
Right, exactly. Yeah. When the Scan Eagle is en route, the victory's coming soon.
Yeah. And when you see the body parts just corkscrewing through space, like, I'm going to put that in the W column.
Yeah, the IR mist of that shithead who blew up some Marines 2 weeks ago, and you're watching him getting turned into a mist. Yeah. It's like, you don't have to abstract anything. Yeah. You built this thing. It went through that border checkpoint. It worked. Like, they searched this truck down to the tires, and you got your shit through, and it worked, and bad guys are dead. Like, I actually got really high level anxiety that I had to go to a psychologist about, because I did not know what the fuck I was going to do when I got out. Because I had such job satisfaction. Yeah. And
you don't think you'd feel the same way at like IBM? It sounds like it's the same.
Yeah, right. It could be. There's probably a branch. Is there an SAD in IBM?
I don't know. I was going to say, fuck, if IBM's doing that stuff, we need to do some more research.
Yeah, Special Activities Division of the IBM. But I got really a lot of anxiety. And then as the war started to turn, my last time in Afghanistan was in 2015 as we were closing down Bagram. And we were still running ops, but they were, few and far between. Whereas it might have been 2 or 3. Like, there were times where we did 2 or 3 in a day. Yeah. Like, there'd be an objective. We'd be on the objective. We'd pull cell phones. We found out where there was another house, and we'd get back to the flight line. People would rekit and go out.
You run upstream as fast as you can.
And that didn't happen all the time. But all I'm saying is it happened enough. And then as it started being every 2 months, then every 3 months, then we were lucky to get one in every 6 months. Working with JSOC elements, then I was like, all right, this is the end. Then we shut down Bagram. But I had so much anxiety. I really did. Like I said, I'm overstimulated as it is. I'm always thinking. I have that ADHD. And I was just like, you are going to become an alcoholic and kill yourself when you get out of the military. Like,
that's really literally had that self-talk. That's positive self-talk. Yeah, I know. Very good job.
I had that thought though, because I was like, you're going to become a contractor? You're going to go work at an NSA and go drive to Fort Meade every day?
And that's the path for the vast majority.
95%. Yeah. I had a very good friend of mine that we went through some qualification courses together and stayed in contact. He went to work for Accenture. So he got to break Accenture's banks. Mm-hmm. Like, he would be a red team guy essentially for Accenture. And that was the job I was looking at. Yeah. And he started at like $300,000 a year.
It's not bad.
So I was like, I'll do that. And that's what I was thinking about until I thought through on Spartan Forge. That's the path I took. But regardless, I started to get really a lot of anxiety about that. And then I left that community, and a colonel that I knew when he was a captain asked me to be part of this organization that built stuff. Essentially in the Army, we were called program executive offices, and they're responsible for the man training and equipping of all of the forces in the military. So every arm of the military has one. Their job is to build kit. So there'll be a quick reaction kit I was doing a hyper version of quick reaction kit, where an ODA guy or a SEAL would say, I need a magazine for an AK-47 that can do this. And then I'd build it. The Army adopted what was called a quick reaction thing, where there'd be an operational needs statement that got written, and it would go get built in DC with more rigor and
a timeline that was far, far longer.
Far, far longer. But then once that capability in the quick reaction sense was validated and could get lined up with an operational requirement, then it would transition to what was called a program of record. And it was like, hey, that kit that we built, or those things that we welded onto the side of the Humvee, well, now it's an LMTV, and we're going to build these things for the next 20 years. So he was a first group guy, and we knew a lot of the same people, and I'd done some good stuff for him in the past. He asked me to come be an advisor as a W4 in a program executive office, and I was like, hey, sir, it's not me. I'm going to have to shave, put the uniform back on. I've got 3 years left. I'm just going to go sit in a talk.
Be bored out of your mind.
Be bored out of my mind for 3 years and get out, because I knew I was getting out. And I'll get to that point, the genesis of your question, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. It's taken me a long time to get here. But he convinced me. His name was Marty Hagenston. And so I went to go become an advisor for him. And at that point, I had to go and get all of my Army safety briefings, and all of my stuff was managed by a separate office. So when I had to do my training, OPSEC, physical security, all of that bullshit, I would go to an Army element, not in that office, because that office was mostly civilians. I'd go to an Army office, and they would train you up and say, you're trained for this quarter, go forth, do great things. And I was sitting in a briefing. Now, understand my vision of the world. I had just left a really high-paced, do what the fuck needs to get done, no bullshit, we will fire you, people will die if you're an incompetent asshole framework, essentially, is what I was coming out of. And then I went to this highly bureaucratic, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full. I'm advising a colonel and a 2-star were the 2 people that I answered to every day. I got this briefing about sexual harassment, and the really overweight E7 was given the briefing, and I say that just because you couldn't make this into a movie, just the way that this looked. And what I remember her saying to me was, if you say something, say you say to a female, that dress looks nice, and you had the thought in your head, I'd like to buy my wife that dress. So you just said it, right? If she took that as sexual harassment, her perception is the reality, and you now are subject to the UCMJ.
Oh boy.
And I was just what? How? So hold on a second. And so I just ran all of these hypotheticals past her, and she's like, if the perception of the person that you're talking to is that this is sexual harassment, we're going to treat this as it's sexual harassment. We're going to do a 15-6. We're going to do the investigation. And that's how this works now. I remember walking back to the colonel and talking to him about this, and be like, dude, just shut up and do the training. But then I started seeing people actually getting in trouble for this type of shit.
Yeah.
And there's this woke mind virus, I'll call it, this, whatever you want to call it. I don't care what you call it. It's just this thing that's unmoored from reality, where we just get to assign things and say something that is clearly blue is black, or that something is clearly not meant to be offensive is now offensive.
Have you found or determined the origin point of that ideology? Because I have tried to work my way backwards on it, because to me it does not make sense. And if we can't agree on what reality is, objective reality, we are so fucked.
Screwed.
But I can't figure out where it started.
I mean, for me, and there's probably many more places, but for me it kind of started with when people got to ascribe either the behaviors of the past or of the presuppositions of today without having ever been subject to any of those things and now award themselves virtue as a result of it. So I am a bisexual Navy SEAL, and
Oh, good for you, sir.
Yeah, no, I'm not a SEAL, but
Hold on. Do you identify as
I could identify as one. But that's my reality. Okay. And now I'm going to wear my pinks and greens on Monday. I'm going to be wearing a skirt. And if you question that for a second, first off, because I identify that way, I'm now part of a class that I wasn't part of before. And you must ascribe me virtue. And if you denigrate me in any way, shape, or form, the full force of the legal framework of our system of laws will be brought to bear on you and your career, regardless of your intent. So when people got to figure out that they could get things without really doing anything and get assigned protections,
it took the door off the hinges.
Yes, it did. And then everyone got to do it, and everyone got to say, you know what, I have thought about this. Maybe I do want to suck a dick. Maybe this will fix me. And
you're actually describing Michael's internal monologue often.
As soon as you said that, I knew you were going to say that.
So, and I've got no problem with people who want to suck dicks. Guys that want to suck dicks, go for it. I don't care. Like, I won't judge you. I truly won't. In fact, one of my best friends that I have the most intellectual discussions with was a gay Jewish man.
Have you let him suck your dick?
No, I have not, to date.
Then how can you say you care for him?
The day is young.
Okay.
So, but I very thoughtful, well-meaning guy, and I don't have any problems with him or the way he lives his lifestyle. And in fact, it's not incumbent on me to judge him because I've got enough of my own shit I need to fix before I need to worry about anybody else.
Live your life.
Exactly. So just go do your thing. But you don't get to go do your thing and say, now because I'm doing this thing, and I didn't like the way you looked at me in the chow line, or you said something off canter, like, hey guy, hey Andy, I need you to be as calculating and as cold feeling as possible, and you need to kill whoever I tell you to, but you need to be sensitive to this guy's feelings while you're doing it.
No.
And don't step out of line. There will be no dick and fart jokes around this guy because
yes, there will.
I know. And
this is why I also got in trouble at every rank in the military.
Yes, and I got in trouble for this types of stuff. Like, I would have these conversations in these briefings and be like, hey, you're a CW4. There are young sergeants watching you do this, and you're breaking the framework, and it's eroding morale and discipline.
Yeah, but the framework you're trying to force me into is destroying the entity in and of itself.
Yeah, and what we're trying to fight and protect.
Yeah.
Yes, and so that level of analysis was not appreciated. I never got, it never manifested to anything, but regardless, I was getting those talks like, hey, you're a CW4, you're a senior leader, you're a year away from being a W5, which is, you'll be advising 4 stars. Mm-hmm. You need to grow up.
Maybe the advice to the 4 stars is we need to stop all this malarkey that's going on here before it gets the fuck out of control.
Yes, exactly. And so I knew, and I watched it get worse, and then I had one thing, I'll get personal. I had one thing in an office where I supervised a group of 4 people. One of them was a female, and she reported to her EO person that she thought I was being too aggressive. That was it. There was never nothing was filed. Mm-hmm. Nothing was, they said they would have their own contract for this. I think it was khaki. Khaki was going to assign someone, not a government person, a khaki person, to look into why I was aggressive.
Okay.
And my office pulled me out of that billet.
Wow.
While this was happening. And I was like, if you're not going to start an actual investigation where I'm actually being investigated, are we just going to let this contractor run around and ask people if I'm actually aggressive? They pulled me out of the billet. And then I went and watched other guys lose their careers for similar types of things, where again, we need you to shoot people in the face, but there can be no dick and fart jokes while you're doing it. And for me, I don't know if you've ever read Soren Kierkegaard. Have you ever read Kierkegaard? I had a thing back in 2008 where I was going to get out of the military because I was on a deployment to Iraq and I had no fucking clue why I was there. And I did not know what I was doing. I did not know where I was going. I did not know why I exist or why people were dying. And I'm not a morale. I don't have the moral high ground. I'm not enlightened or anything. I just didn't understand what the strategy was and where we were going and how we were going to get there. None of it made sense to me at that time. This was right at the front of the surge. Mm-hmm. I was between Ramadi and Baghdad at the time, going back and forth. And I was going to get out of the Army. I was in E6 at the time. And I went back and just said, I'm going to find out why I'm in the military because I have no idea why I'm even here. I didn't join because we talked about why I joined. but I didn't know why I would re-enlist or get out. It was one or the other. And my re-enlistment window was coming up while I was in theater. So I said, I'm going to owe it to myself that anytime I'm not working, which at that time, that job, I was maybe working 6 hours a day. And then I was working out for 3 hours, and I was going to the chow hall, and I was watching movies. I was like, all of that's going to go away. You're going to find out why you're in the military and what the Bill of Rights means and why this country exists and why it seems to be the only beacon of freedom and of light and enlightenment in the world right now, currently, besides Canada, which is just our greatest national park. It's the top hat of the country.
That's exactly how I describe it, actually.
Yeah.
I use those exact same words.
Yeah, a buddy of mine uses them. And
or
I
the
stole it from
51st
him.
state.
The 51st state, right? Exactly. The only reason you haven't gotten beaten up is because your older brother's cool.
Yeah.
And so shut up, Justin. So I said I wanted to go back to our foundings, and being an addictive person, having that ADHD and that personality that we talked about before, I went all the way back and read everything I could voraciously. I got into existentialism. I got into, reading Freud and Carl Jung and reading Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, the Federalist Papers, anything that I could get that was telling me why the Western experiment worked and why nothing else was working. Mm-hmm. Like, why were people being hung in streets in Saudi Arabia still, and they're an ally of ours?
Very good question.
And why do we tolerate that? Or like, how does this happen? How does this one beacon of freedom? Because at that time we were way more free than we are now. But how is this existing, and why am I a part of this? And should I stay or go? So I went back and read all of that, and it took me like 7 months. Like, I was reading all the time. Anytime I could work, I was carrying the books with me and just doing the same thing I told you I did with RF and signal analysis, which was I was voraciously ingesting as much as I could. I say that all to say I read Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard was one of our first existentialists. And he tells this story about a clown. He's got a book called Either Or. And he tells this story about a clown who's in the back of a theater, and the theater starts on fire in the back. And the clown runs onto the stage and tells people, he's in his full outfit, clown, dressed as a clown. He says, the theater's on fire, you guys need to get out of here. And people start laughing. And he gets more ridiculous, and as he's getting more ridiculous, he's getting more animated, and people start laughing more.
Yeah.
And everyone burns to death. Everyone dies.
Does the clown at least make it out?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think everyone dies.
Okay.
I haven't read this book since 2006, but I think everyone dies. That is, I've always hearkened back to that when I think about why I, as a military guy, would tell crass jokes or make dick and fart jokes or talk about someone who had died and make fun of them. Like someone I knew who had died, and I would say, hey, remember when Joe would do X, Y, and Z? What a fag.
Yeah.
And what you wanted to say was something else about Joe, but you didn't. But you wanted to bring Joe up, and everyone laughed. And that is the character I've become today, is that clown. I feel like everything is really bad, and bad things are happening in the world, and we're on a bad path. And I'm screaming it at the top of my lungs, but it's just coming across as funny or as not the intent of what I'm trying to put off. But also, I also use humor myself as a valve to relieve pressure. So when there's pressure,
incredibly common in the communities that we worked in.
Yes,
gallows humor is absolutely real.
Yeah, and it needs to be. It has its place, and you feel better when everyone can laugh when otherwise horrible shit's happening around you.
I have been at funerals where the person being lowered into the ground is being made fun of.
Yes. Yeah.
And everybody who hears that is going to think it's horrendously bad. I was dying laughing.
There's a beauty in it that you can't describe until you've experienced it.
Correct.
And
because otherwise, what am I going to do? Just let my brain explode?
Right. Am I going to really internalize all of this and put the cap on the top?
Yeah.
And then wonder why Andy hauled off at the Kinko's with a AR-15?
Yeah.
I won't have to wonder. I'll know why. You told him he couldn't tell jokes while you were sending him out to kill people. So that for me, and all of this to bring it back, is I do feel like that clown. I associate with that clown. And I do feel like there's bad things going on, but now I'm being told I don't have a relief mechanism that works for me while I'm doing this. And so to answer your question that you asked me 31 hours ago, I saw that happening, and I saw people's careers being affected and people being kicked out of the military at 17 years because they were telling jokes or they were acting inappropriately or doing anything that should just resolve in some extra duty. Their lives being irrevocably changed, and I knew I couldn't participate in the system anymore. On top of that, all of the other stuff that we've talked about so far in this podcast, which also bothered me, I knew that if I went the route of a contractor or a federal government employee or something on the inside, that my days were numbered and that this would come for me and I just shouldn't participate.
When you were getting out as a warrant, how much lead time did you have to? Were you signing enlistment contracts at that time, or did you just have to give them a couple months?
No, you just wrote what was called a relinquishment of office or something like that.
Would you give them a couple months then?
Yeah, it was like 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about 6 months I gave them, and just said it's my time. And they actually, they said, hey, you could be a W-5 here in a couple of years. Like you should think about sticking around. And they had good re-enlistment bonus, or there were bonuses for staying in. And I just said, look, I'll be fired and disgraced if I stay here. Like take this podcast that we've done today and say that guy's an active duty military guy talking like that, and then show it to a room of 50 people, and I will be under investigation.
I mean, I would raise my hand and ask what unit you were assigned to because I'm curious about joining.
Yeah, right. Is there more of these waters? Can I have one of these or no? If there's not, that's fine. I'm talking a lot.
Michael, do we have any more?
I don't know. Do you want me to go check out there?
Yeah, I want you to actually fucking do something.
Pause that video.
Yeah, he's fine.
I'm just joking. I don't even know him, and now I'm busting his balls. I'm sorry.
No, he deserves every bit of it. How'd you feel on your last day when you walked out?
Sad. It's the truth. I thought I'd be in for 30 years. If you would have asked me in 2016, I said I'm going to retire as a crusty W-5. And
it's a weird day, right? Picking up your DD-214.
It is weird.
And you leave base
and
for
then
the
you're
first
just
time?
like, this is it.
Yeah.
This is everything that I've done. Not everything. I'm saying that the government says that I've done.
On 2 pages.
On 2 pages. Yeah.
Here's 25 years of your life reduced down to single space. That's probably like a nice 8 font.
Yeah. 10% of it's wrong.
100%. Yeah.
I didn't get a Bronze Star of Valor. What the hell is this?
Well,
you got to fix that.
Yeah. In this day and age, I don't even think it matters. Did you find one, Michael? That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, I was sad. I thought I'd be in for 30 years. I loved what I did. I do believe I was a force multiplier at a time in my career. I do believe I was inspiring young guys to go similar routes. I do believe I was bringing a sense of stability to an otherwise unstable world at that time. I believed I had re-enlisted in Iraq back then for the right reasons. I understood what the nature of our founding was and why I needed to be part of this going forward.
In addition to the tax benefit?
In addition to the tax benefit. Let's be honest.
If you gave me the choice to re-enlist overseas or at home, I'm like, I don't know. Do I want to give away 30% of this?
Yeah, right.
No.
No, I don't. So, I re-enlisted in front of Saddam's throne in the
hell yeah,
in the Perfume Palace.
Okay. I like it.
I think it was on Slayer. Camp Slayer was it called? I don't remember. One of the palaces had his throne that he would meet people, dignitaries, when he came in. And there's all kinds of pictures of him on this throne, like meeting Gaddafi or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was sitting on it with my rifle and my re-enlistment papers after I re-enlisted. It felt pretty good.
Fuck yeah. What time do you get on the helicopter today?
We've got to be on the helicopter at 4:30.
Okay.
So
we still have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
We've referenced Spartan Forge a few times. Break it down for me. Because I actually have some questions about this too. Specifically, on your website, it talks mostly about deer. Can we extrapolate this out beyond deer?
Yes, it is.
Because, I mean, obviously up here, we're Western hunters. We got elk. There are deer here, muley and whitetail. But I was just curious if it expands beyond what it seems like whitetail deer hunting. My God. Before I got into hunting, I had no idea how that community, whitetail deer hunters, holy shit.
Yeah, it's intense.
They really like whitetail deer.
Yeah, they really do. It's an addiction. I'm addicted to it. Like I'm out here for an elk hunt, which is going to be awesome. But so we started as a whitetail centric, just by virtue of me being a whitetail guy.
Well, what's the concept?
The concept is to abstract out the F3 EAD cycle, the find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, disseminate cycle, and provide that abstraction for hunters. So all of the target analysis and variable analysis, and this sounds dumb and cliched. I'm sure people who aren't hunters or military people will be like, this is dumb.
Until a massive whitetail that you want to shoot walks out in front of you.
But really, it's all about identifying the variables involved in programming a hunt. Like hunters are targeters. They have targets they want to prosecute. And so what I've done is abstracted that targeting analysis and put it into an application similar to what you might have seen in like an ATAC. Mm-hmm. We have a feature called Blue Force Tracker where you can draw some geometry, drop pins, they automatically share, and in about a month or two, anyone who enters that geometry will share their location with everyone else who's on the team, and you'll know their battery level and where they were at last. So if Grandpa falls out of your deer stand or your 12-year-old gets lost tracking a deer,
both of which happen more often than you would
way more
like
than
to think.
So, and Blue Force Tracker was initiated for the Pat Tillman, right? The friendly fire, to deconflict battle space where there are friendly forces where you otherwise wouldn't know.
I mean, or you could just fucking look at what you're shooting at.
Right, that too.
You know?
Yes, for sure. Identify the target.
God.
Don't point this at something you don't want to destroy.
I met Pat in our first, for the invasion of Iraq.
Wow.
What a spectacular human being.
The best of us.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to describe him, the best of anyone.
And his brother Kevin has often forgotten that conversation. They were there serving together, supporting the Ranger Battalion that was with us throughout that entire first deployment in 2003.
Imagine being in the NFL on multi-million-dollar contracts and saying, I'm going to go be an E4 in the Ranger Regiment. Like I would always like to look at the past and look at other people like that and their decisions and say, I would do the same thing. I wouldn't have fucking done that.
It's hard to say until you're in their shoes.
Well, no, I would say I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would look at someone like, the people who hit Anne Frank. I wouldn't have done that. Like, people think they would.
Yeah.
But when you exist in the zeitgeist, and it's difficult for people to understand, but until you've lived in Iraq, you don't understand bartering countries. People where their capital comes through bartering, trading, lying. Totally. It's just a different culture altogether. So if you're raised in that culture, that is the correct way to operate in the world. And the correct way to operate in that world was in Germany, where the Jews are the reason that we lost World War I, and they shit all over us, and now they have their own, this is all happening, and they're responsible, and that's why you don't have food. And that was the culture. If me being who I was as a young man, I probably would have been a Nazi. I'm just saying, I've looked at myself.
That might get cut into a reel.
That's coming. I'm just trying to be honest with myself and say, if I existed in that culture and I'm watching my mom and dad suffer and the bread lines and the inflation of the marks, like the money system and all of the horrible shit that was going on for them as a result of World War I, because what we should have done is killed them all. Sorry. But like, I'm kind of down with the Moses' rules of war, which is if you got to go to war with someone, the threshold should be so painfully high that you ought not ever enter into it until it's the last choice, which is I'm a proponent of.
I agree.
And I mean a high threshold. Like this had better be an existential threat to us before we go dump $170 billion into a foreign country like the Ukraine.
I was sitting with Tulsi Gabbard and we were talking about war. And I think another thing that would help is those in a position to vote for us to engage in kinetic operations have to declare a member of them family or themselves to go with and
or
actually participate. And then here's another one. I was having a conversation with the oldest man who ever joined the military. He was 63.
When he joined?
When he joined. His book is right over there. The episode came out on Monday, actually. Clinical psychiatrist and psychologist, about 40 years of experience to working with soldiers, specifically on things like post-traumatic stress. He had worked with people from World War II, Korean War, Vietnam for years. One of the things that he brought up as an idea is we might be better off changing the minimum enlisted age to 21.
Yeah,
to give brains more of an opportunity to fully form so they can deal with the potentially traumatic things that you're going to be exposed.
Or 25. Even today.
I mean, the number.
I'm just saying our 25-year-olds are like the 16-year-olds of 30 years ago.
Point being, why 18? Like we have enough. There would be a little bit of a hiccup, but it's an interesting, at least, thought experiment of could we deal with some of the downrange issues, meaning like on the calendar as you exit and the things that a lot of people struggle with, if we just shifted the age in which they were exposed to it.
I got to watch this podcast.
He was fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I've got my own thoughts on that too.
And I'm not advocating for or against it, but I was like, you know what? I don't know if I've ever heard somebody say raise the minimum enlistment age.
It's a good thought experiment. I think we should raise the voting age. If we're going to abstract responsibility, you can be on your parents' insurance till you're 27 now or 25 or something.
It's one of those two.
Yeah. If we're going to abstract responsibility into the future and take a kid out of high school and throw them in college and tell them the whole world is a tongue for your butthole and that you can do whatever you want. And oh, by the way, now you get to vote.
Like, what class do they teach that in, by the way? I don't remember seeing that.
I think it was called Cinnamon Ring 101.
Okay, because I just dropped my son off at college, and I don't remember seeing that one on the curriculum.
Well, they're all told they're special. They're paying $100,000 a year to be there, and that they're going to change the world.
He's going to college right where he's in Bozeman, so it's not $100,000 a year. Thank God for in-state tuition. So.
Yeah. So, but what I was saying was, or the point that I was making was, if we raise that age for voting, because we're allowing people to abstract responsibility of the future. But I also agree on raising the enlistment age. The thing I was saying, and I should tie a string to it or a bow on it, is the threshold for war should be so high. But then once we decide to engage in it, we just need to kill everyone. Like, sorry.
The issue is I don't think you can kill an ideology.
Maybe not. But what I'm saying is there throughout the history, I just read a fantastic book by a classicist named Victor Davis Hanson. And I don't remember the name of the book off the top of my head, but he essentially examines the decimation of cultures throughout society, whether it would be with Rome or what happened in Constantinople, what Alexander did there, where he just killed everyone. Took some slaves and some women, but all the men died.
Genghis Khan was another one of that approach.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating genocide on this podcast right now. But what I am saying is, we've gone to war with too many half measures.
Yeah.
Where we've created too many opportunities for this to mess us up. Look at us arming the Taliban in the 80s. Who knows what could happen with our arming of the Ukrainians?
Yeah,
they could not be our friends in 20 years, and they have javelins now. We are eager to spend the war dollar and to send people into harm's way for reasons we don't fully understand. So my thing would be the threshold needs to go through the ceiling. Like my threshold would be insanely high because there's always deterrence and other things that we can do economically. Reagan did it perfectly, I think, with the Russians. Like there was not a bullet fired and he ended the Cold War. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Like that should have been a model for people. It wasn't. They shit on Reagan now. And we don't. So, but if we have to go to war, like if we have to go to war with the Taliban next time, there will be a no Taliban afterwards. It's gone now. You had your chance. You need to fall. And the culture needs to fall. And the way that you treat women and children needs to fall. And that is a relic of the past. And we need to get rid of it totally. But the bar needs to be so high to do that. I think that would be another thing President Bill would do on his 24-hour reign of terror.
Also, on the other
I'd be
side
killed by hour 4, by the way.
On the other side of that, if you look at the lens from our adversary, how likely would you be to engage with an entity or organization that
where you know that's the outcome?
If you know that you rise to the level that they're going to take action, everything that you know ceases to exist.
Permanently.
Yeah.
No one would do it, and that would be the deterrence. Nobody messes with the biggest guy in the playground. If the only time you saw him fight, he collapse a guy's side of his head.
Yeah.
Like no one's going to mess with that kid ever in school, ever again.
And he'd also probably be in juvie for collapsing a kid's head, but that's a different part of the story.
Yeah,
that's less germane.
We're not going to talk about that part.
All right, back to Spartan Forge, because I got to get you out of here in about 20 minutes.
I'm sorry.
No,
you're right. So I abstracted that targeting cycle. Identify some other things key to mapping, things like LiDAR features, slope angle shading, things that I was doing in Iraq using drones to map terrain, figuring out terrorist network systems. I did really interesting work on understanding the logistical routes of terrorists when they traverse certain passes and why and what the weather needs to look like.
How much LiDAR do you have coverage-wise in the U.S.?
80% of high resolution.
Okay.
And then 20% of low resolution. And
okay.
We're working to get the rest of that low resolution kitted up. But and then we have a trained AI that predicts deer movement. We're building one for mule deer and elk. And I can get into that ethics of that, or if we do another podcast, all of that. I'm happy to talk through all of that.
Where's it pulling the data from?
Collared biological studies. So they drop a collar on an animal.
Okay.
And now I line that up with weather, and I teach a machine to perform what's called recall, which is making sense of the data at a machine level that's repeatable.
Okay.
So in the instance earlier where I said Andy always goes to the gym when it's below 48 degrees, that would be what's called a single mode level of analysis. I do multimodal level of analysis where I say, what are all of the conditions under where a bull elk really starts chasing or a whitetail animal really starts chasing? And the hunters who've not heard of this or whatever might be rolling their eyes right now. But the problem is that we've got 10% inflation. And if a guy needs to be working, he needs to be working to provide for his family. And if he's got 4 days of vacation this year and he wants to pass on the culture of hunting to his son or put meat on the table for his family, I am down for giving that guy every tool possible.
Let's not forget to add that hunting is becoming more popular and there are more people out there.
Yeah.
So if you want to walk the same trails and go to the same places as other people, by all means do so. But if you want to be more successful, why not arm and educate yourself to the best of your ability?
Yeah, for sure. And if you don't want to use those features, then just use it for navigating. Just use it for walking to your pins that you dropped in the map or whatever. We're half the price of our competitors. So you can do that. And so, yeah. And then we just put out 3 days ago, a large language model that we've trained internally called Cyber Scout. Cyber Scout is like a Chat GPT or a Google Bard or whatever they're calling it now, or a Grok that Elon's doing, which I'll probably take later once he makes it open, because he's gonna. And God bless him for it. We spent 4 years building our own and training it, and we use all of our own public library of science, PLOS One studies, academic stuff, the collared deer movement, and then all of our own internal pro staff. All of the retrieval documents were selected, and everything that this thing tells you about the outdoors, it's only tells you about outdoor pursuits.
Yeah.
But you can say, how do I brain tan a cow elk? How do I perform intersection and resection? How do I take my civilian M4 or AR-15 and turn it into a SOP Mod 2 build? How do I use a lensatic compass?
Yeah.
How would I prep for a halo jump? What do I need to know? Anything outdoors that you're doing, Cyber Scout knows it to a level of detail that I think most would find alarming.
Yeah.
And then you can take that knowledge, and again, for people rolling their eyes, my highest value is the version of myself at 14 who wanted to go and hunt more, who wanted to be outside, who lived in a trailer, didn't have access to these things, had no male persona in my life to learn from. If I get one kid who says, I watched Joe Rogan kill a bull elk and I knew I wanted to do that, and I routinely went to my bow archery shop and never talked to them because I felt intimidated or the bowyer was a dick. So I picked up Cyber Scout and I learned what kind of bow I could shoot, where I could find cheap ones, what arrows I needed, why weight's important, what is MOA, how to sight a target, where I could get bargain barrel camo. And I brought my single mom home 60 pounds of venison. That's my goal.
That's a win.
That's the W. Like the whole company can fail, but if I have that story, I will frame it and put it on the wall. And I've gotten stories from people like my son and I have been trying to kill this buck for 3 years. We used your app and we did it. Those are all great, but those don't hit me in the heart like that story does, because I am trying to reach out to those kids and I am trying to give them everything that I'm building. And I have other companies that I've started and we can talk to them another time, stuff that I'm building into the future. Everything that I'm doing is under the rubric of individual autonomy. So how do I make the individual more knowledgeable and able to comport themselves in a world that's educated and is informed and responsible, so that they don't have to depend on anybody else for what they're doing.
As you were describing this, I was thinking, how dare you, sir, make people less reliant upon the government?
Right. Or get their own venison.
So now that you're throwing AI at this animal data, has there been anything that jumps out that is the most predictive of their behavior? Is it temperature? Are they very habitual in nature? It probably depends per species, but...
Yeah, if you were to grade it on a bell curve, they mostly act the same all the time.
Like humans.
Like humans. But there are pockets where it's different. What gets a deer moving in North Dakota does not get a deer moving in Georgia, or vice versa.
Interesting.
And the AI is tuned for regional differences in the data, because we have a bevy of data. We've been, for instance, for Auburn, who we've been working with for about 5 years, we've got thousands of collared GPS deer, and we've been training models for them, and then we get to use the data in Spartan Forge, and built them mini models. But what gets a deer moving in Alabama is not what gets a deer moving in Maine. There are differences. A point of contact would be humidity factors into the machine's analysis of deer movement in Georgia and the Southeast. Humidity has almost no effect on a deer in North Dakota. So the machine doesn't look at humidity. Whereas in North Dakota, how long snowfall stayed on the ground the prior season and how much forb and agriculture was available, how many crop insurance claims were made and how many crops were left standing in fields, influences the next year's deer rut, because of the availability of nutrition, affects the breeding cycles of the does, and impacts how early on the bell curve they come into estrus. So those things are all, and this was the same type of analysis I was doing for terrorists while I was in the military.
How many collared elk are there?
A lot. Canada,
Really?
Yeah, Canada does a lot, and they make the good thing about Canada, if I can say that.
Why do they do that? Why do they?
Because they're trying to understand the distribution.
Okay, that's
and
fair.
Selling tags, migration routes, how many elk are left, how many of the collared, if we have a subset of 1,000 collared elk, how many got killed?
Okay.
Where were they when they got killed? All of that type of stuff. So they're looking at it because, well, A, I think they're trying to understand more about elk, but B, it informs rates for next year, how many tags are going to sell, that type of thing.
That makes total sense.
So, but what the good thing about Canada is they have a requirement that if taxpayer money is used, they have to make the data public. We do not have that requirement in the U.S. So I have to build relationships, not unlike a source selection cycle,
Totally.
where I'm talking to an academic for 3 years before he gives me one piece of data. I like what you like. I'm your friend. Let's go for dinner. Hey, I'm in town. What do you need? I can get you a discount on a bow. Until he's like, Bill Thompson's a good dude. I'll let him use my data and I'll let him build me models.
Are there pockets in the U.S. where elk are collared?
I've got data from Montana, Wyoming.
And is that state tagging?
It's mostly universities, and some universities partnered with states.
Okay.
A lot of the state tag people that I get a hold of will not share the data. Some of them do. Some of them don't.
I don't know if I've ever seen a tagged elk. I have seen a tagged deer, but I've never seen a tagged elk.
Yeah. There's a lot more cow elk tag than bull elk, surprisingly.
Well, if you tag the ladies, you're going to find the boys
That's
at some
right.
point in time.
We said that in the military as well.
Indeed. Some things, human and I'll just call them mammalian behavior, I think can probably be extrapolated and work the same way.
Yes, exactly. And so that Cyber Scout just came out, and we've got more mapping features. We've got a feature called Eagle Eye where it tilts the camera to the side, and you can look at high-resolution 5 to 15 centimeter imagery for half of the U.S. So for half the U.S., we have Scan Eagle level imagery.
Yeah.
So 5 to 15 centimeters, you can see a baseball on the ground, as long as it's a different color than the ground. Whereas most apps would use 1 meter imagery where you could see 2 baseball bats crossed on the ground.
Yep.
And for the other half of the U.S., we're putting out 2023 imagery for all of the U.S. soon, in the next couple of weeks. And then there'll be 10 to 12 years of historical for all of the U.S. after that.
To update the data going forward, do you basically task platforms, or is this something that
on the UAV imagery, we work with a company where we have a contract and we task platforms.
Sweet.
And we work with other, one group that we work with is a group of realtors who also want the same data.
Oh,
so a realtor group will say to us, hey, we want this area flown. And I'll be like, I don't have imagery there. So yeah, I'll throw down on that contract to get that plane to go fly there.
So I know one of the competitors, and a lot of hunters use it because it delineates between private and public. Does Spartan Forge have that ability yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's private public data and all of that stuff. And I'm really not trying to build a mapping service. Mapping is central to hunting because that's the rubric or the optic that we understand hunting through, because that's what the other apps have been. But I'm trying to get a much more holistic view of that targeting cycle than what they're doing. So although the markets overlap, there's also places where they don't overlap, like with a large language model that we just put out, that we're integrating it with a state machine where it will be able to assist you in doing map analysis.
I mean, again, some of those competitors literally, and I support people doing this, they need to know what fucking district they're in and whether or not they're on private and public.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a use case to make sure people do that as well, because you also don't want to get on the wrong side of the hunting industry from a legal perspective either.
Right, for sure.
So
that's
why I asked that. If it was standalone, or if you would recommend usage with other entities that are already out there.
Yep. So, I mean, I would recommend, there are things right now that we don't have that other apps have that you need. So there's a small market of people that probably need both. We'll add those features eventually. It's a case of most of my competitors' development staff's like 40, 50 people. I have 5 guys. And all of us, including the leadership, are still writing code and doing the work. So we're very much a small, bootstrap, very small. Very
what do
small.
you see when you're writing code? And let me ask you, this is the lens that I view this through. My experience with seeing people write code comes from movies. Mm-hmm. And it's like ones and zeros, and the shit that is scrolling down on the screen, to me, looks like an alien language. When you look at it, do you see something different? Like, what does that look like in your brain?
I mean, as long as it's a code that I understand, so if it's like Python or C# or some type of objective type of coding, excuse me. Even if I don't know it, if someone says like, here's how it works, I can usually figure it out fairly quickly.
Can you see a picture of what that code is going to become, or are you looking at the actual things that you're typing in?
I can see what the code's function is.
Okay.
Or if I look at if the code is written well and it's got what are called unit tests, you can understand the fundamental parts of the code that are trying to be tested, and then you can derive a function from that.
Okay.
So it's like a language. It is a language. It's like learning French or Russian or something like that. Once you understand it, then tu peux parler français.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, again, for people fluent in it, I'm like, are you drawing a picture with what you're putting in there, or like
understanding functions?
Yeah,
it's like reading.
Okay,
Yeah.
In order to make you get on time, I feel like we could do like 6 more hours, but this just means we'll link up again.
Yeah.
But I need to get you out to your epic hunt, which we're not going to give the details of because people will fucking lose their minds.
Yeah.
So sorry.
We're doing some craziness.
Which is awesome. And we're not going to share that craziness now, maybe in between
later.
hunting season. Final thoughts. I mean, fuck, we covered
a lot.
We opened wild. I don't know what we covered in between.
Wild as hell. I'm sorry if you lose some subscribers on this one.
I don't care.
All right. I know that about you now. I have to say, and I won't get details, obviously, but our early this is not the cinnamon ring discussion we had earlier. I have a tremendous amount more respect for you based on our early conversations. Obviously, we can't get into it, and I would just say Andy's the real deal. I
do my best.
There's the currency of being a truth broker is probably the most important currency we have as a species. And it sounds to me like you're in that wheelhouse, and I hope more people follow your lead.
I try. On that note, let's get you out killing elk.
All right, man.